Okay, I'm not Julius, obviously, and I can't fill it in for him. We don't have a talk by him, so we can't even present it remotely. Instead, we took some time more for the keynote, and I will now deliver something often, we call it the Faust fever. I will deliver a kind of an antidote, because basically what I'm going to do is to whine about some features that I think the Faust standard architectures should have, and they don't, for various reasons. So Dominic, you're affected by this, Stefan as well. That's not to say that the stuff isn't working well as it does, just that I wanted some more features, and these are some of my thoughts on that, and maybe we could be working on this sometime, maybe even this year, in the autumn maybe. Let's see. Okay, so one area that I've only have thoughts about, but which I use a lot, is OSC. And the OSC support in Faust, what we heard about, which was largely or completely done by Dominic, who's a real expert on OSC. For those of you who don't know OSC, it's Open Sound Control, which I mean here, protocol and a binary message format for sending and receiving control data. So it's a kind of alternative to MIDI, but much different from MIDI. It's much more flexible. It has great customizability. And one of the major things also is that controllers can easily be implemented in software and are typically implemented in software. Let me show that. I need to switch my network first. So there we go. And I also need to do, well, I'm going to do that later on the laptop, but now I can launch this. I can only, do we have the camera? It's pointing over there, but I can just hold it up. It's not very interesting what you see there, just a couple of sliders. So you basically have a GUI builder which produces an application with a few sliders or whatever GUI elements you want, and then you can use these to transmit and also receive OSC messages. And Faust units have automatic support with it for this. You only need to specify the -OSC option with most two scripts, and then you have this built-in OSC receiver and sender which you can use, and that works very nicely. So I've shown an example here, the -OSC option, how you specify that. So this works pretty well, but so this I've made an OSC dump of messages emitted by the Faust OSC server to illustrate the problem that I have with it. The basic problem is that each separate Faust module needs a separate UDP port, and that's you can see that here I have 3 modules, a synthesizer, a chorus effect, and a reverb effect, and pretty basic stuff. You have I sometimes have not dozens, but maybe a dozen of these modules running at the same time. If you're running in a digital audio workstation software or even in PD, it's easy to have 1 or 2 dozens of these modules running. And then if you use the standard OSC support, you'll need a UDP port for each of them. And so you can see that here that these are OSC messages emitted by the modules to advertise their addresses. So there's 1 port for output and 1 for standard output and 1 port for error output, and there's 1 input port for each unit. So that's a problem. Of course, if you're running in a digital audio workstation and want to control this with something like Touch OC, which I have on my phone, then you're in for some hardship, because you'll have to switch OC, the UDP ports all the time. So that's not very practical. And let me briefly show you how that works. So, and destroy the microphone. Always happens to me. So I hope we're back. Yes, we are. Okay. Sorry about that. Now let me quickly switch to the. In order to connect locally, I'm using a little router there. And now let's fire up Jack. And then let's fire up Ardor. Okay. And let's fire up a shell where I can do the OC dump thing. So C dump. And now I'm going to fire up a session that I prepared. So there we go. This is just a little MIDI file, and I have some Faust units on this MIDI bus, and both tracks just go into the MIDI bus. So that's not very complicated. And here I have several Faust modules. So if I open one of them, I've made it so this isn't quite the way I actually want it to be, but to deal with the shortcomings, I made it so that the OC interface is married to the GUI interface. That's not an ideal way to do it, but that way I can cope with the no multiple OC port things. Because on this Touch OC thingy, I can now control only this one module, which runs on UDP port 5510, which is also what I dialed in here. And if I change, for instance, the resonance of the filter, there it starts moving. You start seeing it. So that's the way it's supposed to work. But now, if let's say I open the chorus one, and in the terminal you can see that this is now running, of course, on another UDP port, and my chorus, well, I'd have to change Touch OC basically to the new port. The alternative then is to just close all modules, and let me see here. No, this wasn't what I wanted to do. The subtractive one, which is still here. So let's close this and start chorus. Now chorus will be running on, because no other modules are loaded, and it will now run on the UDP port 5510, and I can change the level. But that's no way of working in a digital audio workstation. That's just too cumbersome, and there are ways to deal with that in Faust actually. So first, the problems with all of that is that, well, it's untidy. We need lots of UDP ports when they're not really needed, because OC already has a hierarchical address scheme built into it. But the real problem is that most of these OC controllers only have a single UDP output port. I mean, it's not hardwired, so but you then have to change it if you want to control multiple modules. It's possible to work around this with Faust components. So you just take all the three modules that I need and put them in a serial composition, as I have them here. So, and then you use that module instead of the three I had before. But that's not how sound engineers work. If they work with a digital audio workstation, they want their separate modules which they can control and route separately. So that's a problem. Yeah, now how to fix it? Well, my idea would be to have, and we can maybe discuss this also in the roundtables, to have an OSC server which manages all Faust units running on a single machine. And that shouldn't be too hard to do. You can do that in user space. It doesn't have to be a system service, which has which causes trouble with portability and stuff. And what you can actually, it should be, I think Dominic will be able to implement that, but we should have a central server there which manages all the communication between all the OSC apps and the Faust units running somewhere. It could be in PD, it could be in some other software, it could be in Audacity, or it could be in Ardor, in Qtractor, wherever. So that would be the idea. So it's, I mean, that's not rocket science. It's a pretty basic idea, but of course the devil is in the details here. We need a way to figure out to configure the back channel so that the Faust unit knows where to send back the data which it generates, for instance in passive controls. And we need to be able to handle different instances of the same Faust module. So either by some automatic numbering scheme or by some naming scheme, and that needs to work across architectures. And then one thing which is very convenient to have, which you will see in a short moment, is that you really want to have zero-conf support nowadays. And that's not too hard to throw in either, so that you basically don't have to configure the network anymore. It will discover which device to connect to, and that will be much easier. And I can show you a prototype implementation of that, but what I can show you is PD Faust, which is a bit different because it's only a single instance of PD, but it works with multiple Faust units in PD. And I can briefly show you that, and that will be the first part of the talk. So let's close this down. And let's launch into PD. So little test patch here. So I have a couple of Faust, exactly the same Faust modules, just compiled as a plugin for which can be loaded by PD Faust. And so you see the modules up there. Chorus, free web, same modules, and the GUI is automatically generated from the Faust program, and so these subpatches here are just graph and parent subpatches which get filled automatically, and you see it already connected to my phone. That's the zero-conf magic which I have in PD. Not in PD Faust, it's a separate module, but you can download that from the same website. And now I'm already connected, and I should be able to reset these to the default values just by sending all the values, and now this is reinitialized so that the slider positions all match up, and then I can start either changing the resonance here, and it will move the slider there, or I can move the slider there, and I can also move the chorus at the same time, even though it's in a separate module, and configure the free verb. And let's maybe listen to some music, but it's old music, so it's not copyrighted, hopefully. It's a MIDI file I found somewhere on the map, on the internet, map. Okay, and let's take this file here and start playing. Maybe I should have sound connected. Ah, there it is. Okay. Is that the right one? Ah, okay. Let's first see that we get some sound at all. Sorry for the sine noise. Okay, you get some? Got some? No, no sign? Okay, let's try that again. Okay. So that wasn't the music. The music follows now. Is it okay? The volume is okay? Good. Okay. It's too loud. Let me turn it down a bit. Try again. So I can now reset these units to the default and use this to change these, or use some connected MIDI interface, of course. That's the same thing here. I've configured it that way. So, and then those sliders move as well. So this works like I imagine it to work at, but across different modules on the same system, no matter on which application they're running. And this was my first wine. Okay. We can maybe I just continue with the second one, and then we have a Q&A after that. Okay. Second one. Stefan, now it's your turn. It's about MIDI. So the nice thing is we nowadays have MIDI support directly in Faust, as Jan also told us about in his brief history of Faust. And we already have that in most standalone architectures. It's also implemented in the Juice architecture. So maybe I've overlooked some, but that's the state right now. And we in those architectures we have basic polyphony support, and we have support. What's very nice about the built-in support, which Stefan did very well, is that we have support for all types of voice messages. So not just controller messages and note messages. We also have aftertouch, and we have pitch bands and so on. You can really catch all these events and also output them, which is important for musicians. We have Jan mentioned that as well, sample accurate timing for control events on input. I don't think on output yet, but on input. And what's also very important for musicians, the MIDI sync, start, stop, and clock messages. Generation of clock messages or synchronizing. I think it's generation of clock messages. It's input, so you get a value which you can use in your Faust program, right? And that's pretty nifty. I know that Vince from SuperDirt uses that a lot. And there's a question in the back. Is there a problem with, you can't hear me? Or maybe the question, maybe keep them for later so that I get through quickly with this here. And so we have all that right now, and it's part of Faust Core, which is potentially it's available for all architectures, and so this works great as well. But the problem that I have here is that there's still some important features missing, which my architectures have, the Faust LV2 and Faust VST architectures, which I consider quite important. So, and one is multitimbrality or multi-channel support, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and the other, which I'm just going to gloss over, is tunability. So the ability to tune your synthesizer to different tunings, temperaments, and that's what musicologists and musicians want, because they want to work with historic temperaments and with microtonality and so on. but I concentrate on the multi-channel support. So what we have here now is that the existing meeting support works great as long as all the voice data is on one MIDI channel. But you get problems when in particular controller data, aftertouch and so on gets messed up between the different MIDI channels, because it only keeps track on the controllers per voice, but not per MIDI channel. And the same is also true for another alternative VST architecture, which was written, I think, in 2014 or so by Jan Michalewski at Karma. And so we have a problem here, which I can probably demonstrate before I show the solution. And this is, where do I have the example? Okay, I'm going to show this with the other thingy. Let's pull up the same session again. And now I don't remember, how do I configure a MIDI input here? Robin, should I better do a separate MIDI track, or I want to have some MIDI input, controller input here, which goes to this bus, or can I do it directly at the bus? Directly, so then I should connect to the MPK Mini, and what happens when nothing happens when I move this, or let me see. No panning. Okay, then I just do it on the screen. Never mind. So let's play this this patch again. And now I don't have output anymore. Why don't I have output? And it forgot its MIDI routing. Actually, all the stuff, interesting stuff, is here on the bus, and same synthesizer effect chain again. But if I now change the panning, you see these two MIDI tracks are on two separate MIDI channels. So if I want to separate them, I normally do this. But you see, they're both moving. And same, of course, with the volume, which can be real trouble. So what this actually means is that if you have a run-of-the-mill MIDI file from the internet, where you have separate MIDI channels, all with their own controller settings, then they won't work with this standard MIDI support, polyphony support in Faust. So, how to fix that? Also, not really rocket science. We need two separate levels. So you need separate. You're doing your voice allocation as usual, so you have to have some assignment anyway. But in the voice allocation, you also record the MIDI channel, and you have separate chunks of control data for each MIDI channel. So what happens now when a control change comes in, let's say there's a control change on MIDI channel 1, which is currently assigned, well, voice 2 is running on MIDI channel 1. Let's assume that. So if you get a control change, let's say for the volume or for the panning controller, what you have to do is not only record it here in the voice, but actually what you first do is you record it here, so that afterwards, when you start playing a new note on MIDI channel 1, that you get the right controller data because you just copy over this block to the new voice. But also at the same time look up which voices are connected now to MIDI channel 1. You need a kind of bidirectional multi-map for that, to do that efficiently. And then you can get then you can update the proper voices as well. So then it will just work, everything. And okay, I'm going to skip over that. And oh no, that's already the end. So this shouldn't be too hard to do, but I think that Stefan and I need to get together because I don't understand Stefan's code, he doesn't understand mine. So we throw it all together and hope for the best. No, it's basically Stefan's code isn't too complicated. It's just various levels where you have to look in half a dozen source files or so. And it's nice and modularized, but it's hard to find things. And my code is too convoluted because it's everything in one big module. So we're on the opposite spectrum of there. And but I hope that we can work on that. And just briefly, in 2 minutes, MIDI tuning standard is also not very difficult to implement. So basically, if you use the octave-based tunings, then you have a table with 12 values, cent offset values. And you also need this multitimbrality, so multi-channel support needs to be in place because MTS is MIDI channel aware. And then I have an example here, but I will, as promised, I will just gloss over it. But this is how such a MIDI tuning table looks like. You just record that. You have the cent offsets, and then there's a simple formula which lets you compute the actual frequencies. If you need to do that relative to the equal temperament. So that shouldn't be. Once we have proper multitimbrality in the core, decoding those MTS messages, you need an interface to grab all the sysx messages because MIDI tuning standard is based on sysx. Then you can put that in there as well, and that's something that I really need in some courses, and we also musicians want to use if you want to work with microtonality. You can either do it in the way that Romain has described, if you have some kind of control which lets you do microtonal stuff, but here it's built in, so it's based only on the 12 tones that you have, but you can tune them any way you want, the 12 tones in the octave. So that would be my two main pet peeves that I have right now, and I think we should really work on getting this stuff together so that it works just as well in the Faust support, and then I can port over my Faust VST and Faust LV2 stuff so that it works. So that it uses the Faust MIDI support, which is in some ways more comprehensive than mine. So it's not clear cut that one is better than the other, but I think Stefan's actually has more features now, but I'm missing these very important features. So thank you. Any questions? I just take the microphone myself now because you see some of the team. Okay, yeah, should be turned on now. So any questions, any remarks?
Thank you. I have a question for the OSC part. Actually, I'm struggling with it because all my apps are modular, each modules, and depending on the order I launch them, I cannot communicate with processing or with pure data or with my head tracker. and so I have to close them all and then to have the right ordering. So my question is, how do you see it for standalone apps on Linux? Maybe the OSC server, that should it be like an independent application and I start at the beginning and then all the Faust apps communicate with it? Like.
Yeah, my idea would be, but Dominic can comment on that, to have that launched automatically. It should, of course, it should be a separate process, but it can be launched through the OSC library that Dominic has written, which we're using now, but then it's a separate piece, runs as known, maybe known by zeroconf, but at a known position, and then you'd all the Faust, if you launch a Faust module, if you insert a plugin or something, then it would use this library function to start the server up if necessary, and otherwise just establish communication. And if you open the next plugin, it would do the same, but it all gets coordinated by this one server. And that can be done in user space, or it could be done as a system service, but system services, they are not supportable and stuff. So you had a remark to that? Okay.
Well, so I've already got what the problem is, and frankly, I'm really not in favor of a server solution because, as you said, the devil is in the details.
Yes.
And if there is a solution without server, I think it would be clearly better. And maybe there is one with some UDP socket options to reuse addresses, so different application can share the same UDP port. You see what I mean?
But then you're still wasting a lot of UDP ports.
No. Yes, only one port for input. The problem then is, which exists even if you have a server approach, is to get a clean addressing space, and that changed during the history of the OSC interface. Because at one time, I don't remember, the first part of the address was something like a pointer, or and every module was sharing the same address. And now I think it's not the case anymore. I don't know, because it has been sometimes that I didn't try, that I didn't use. I'm not doing Faust every day, frankly.
Yeah, I know.
It's a shame, but I've also Yes. The first version, the name of the process was used to as third part of the OSC address. Next, I don't remember why, but there was something like a pointer, 0x or.
Yeah, the automatic paths were an issue, but
that was the same for each module, and I think it's back now to the application name. But maybe there is a solution. I will have a look at it, and maybe there is a solution.
The solution we have now is not working for this use case. I think he made it very clear that it's not just me who's fighting with that.
That's
right?
clear.
Right. Robin, and then you had a question, right?
I think actually it's more of a conceptual issue that it needs to go always through a host. In kind of other, the example would be you automate a parameter, and in this case you must not talk to the plugin directly, but you use Ardour's OSC interface to ask Ardour actually to change the plugin parameter. And in this case, your server solution would be that the whole OSC abstraction would be the host that runs the plugin or that runs the DSP, and you never talk to the plugin directly or to the module or the component.
But not all systems provide that kind of infrastructure. But I agree that this would be the cleanest. That would be the cleanest solution.
Thing that is outside of the module and not even build it in, because otherwise you will always get into more.
But you still have the problem if you're running, say, Ardor and PD as two separate applications on the same system. So Ardor might use its own integration, PD its own, but they also have to be able to talk to each other and with the OSC server or not server. Anyway, so.
But I think you can reuse the address and the UDP port and share the same, so affect the same
Right.
from all the modules that you
I'm not sure, but it might be worth a try, right? So there was a question in the back from a long time ago, so let's do that first. And then we want to, I remember you, and then we want to have lunch.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about sysx messages in the first place,
right.
If they are considered or if they are already implemented. That's
in the architecture. Basically, we don't at the MIDI level. Stefan, you're the better person to answer that. But as I remember it, sysx isn't supported at all in the. So
and it won't be. So it was just out of interest. So. I had an actual use case, for example, with I could imagine a use case where you would use Yamaha mixing desk, for example, and you use plugins, and you can control the Yamaha mixing desks always spit out sysx messages. So you could with each fader on the control, you could then control the Faust plugin.
That's actually that's a reasonable use case where you have constant sysx messages without variable parts,
with a mapping file, for example, or something.
So
like
that the Faust module is able to emit that or translate it into some kind of signal. And that might make sense. Yep.
To come back to the topic we were discussing earlier, wouldn't it be reasonable to come together with the whole Linux audio community, for example, to define some ports, for example, to use? Like, for example, the IANA defines, you have those ports for TCP and so on, and those we could establish such a list. For example, Ardor uses port 4400.
Yeah, but let us.
Data.
That's true. I mean, standardization is always important, but let's figure out a solution that works first, and then we can think about getting that coordinated with the various communities. Because Faust doesn't only run on Linux. It also. But it also runs on Windows, I've been told, and on the Mac.
The time that Windows is separate from Linux is...
Okay. There was one more question over here, right? So, thank you.
Understanding the problem. Is this working? Yes. I have to ask whether this problem is entirely in the scope of Faust. I can immediately imagine using Ardor with some Faust plugins as well as with some other completely different plugins that also use OSC. And obviously you would still like to have a single point of OSC control that would map all of these things. There are many approaches that you could use in Faust. You could create an OSC server specific to Faust that remaps addresses in a way. You could perhaps come up with some kind of library that allows multiple OSC instances on the same system to share a UDP port, although that's more complicated. But truly, if you want to do this right, you want to be able to support all of the OSC aware applications running inside a certain defined space, whether that's within Ardor or whether that's within a single computer or perhaps even on a local network.
Right.
So it's a potentially powerful thing to pursue and kind of exciting to think about. And at the same time, I wonder if baking a solution into Faust itself is only going to solve half of the problem. Perhaps everyone in the core Faust team is also part of the core OSC team. Nevertheless, it seems like there would be a much broader audience for such a solution.
Yes,
beyond
but
just Faust.
actually that's true, but again, same kind of answer. I think we need to work from the bottom up to get a solution that works with Faust, and then maybe generalize it. And but Harry, is that exactly to this
Yes.
point? And you probably can answer that better than I can.
Well, what I'm actually going to do is suggest that we take this as one of the topics for a roundtable maybe
Right.
this afternoon.
That-
I think there's a very good discussion going on here, and there's definitely more stuff to be talked about.
That was also
I-
my idea. I wasn't just whining. Actually, both topics I thought might be something for starting off. Yeah, but eventually you changed the unary minus word in Faust. So if you whine long enough, then eventually things start happening.